Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, GC Smith here, and boy, I'm really excited to be doing this video finally. I've been planning it for a while, and I've just really been wanting to make it, but now with GP London coming up for me, as well as obviously game days after that, as well as the pre-release coming next weekend, I thought it was a really good time to start talking about something that I have seen actually fairly few people talking about. I haven't seen as many people talk about it as I thought it should be talked about, and that is the theory of results-orientated thinking. Now, basically the whole point of this video is to show you what results-orientated thinking is and why it's bad, and why there are pro players out there who talk about it being bad, and why I know so many players out there actually who I've met who have no idea why results-orientated thinking is bad, and actually think it's fairly good, because they kind of, I think, misunderstand it. I think results-orientated thinking might actually be a bad name for it. I think there might need to be a better name for this idea, concept, or theory, whatever you want to call it. And so I've actually got a name for it myself. I don't call it results-orientated thinking other than when I'm talking to other people about it. I try and call it snapshotting because I think that captures a term better. But kind of go through this video, I'm going to go through in like 3 parts really. 1, explain what it is. 2, explain why it's bad. I'll give you some examples. And 3, kind of show you how to go beyond results-orientated thinking. So, first off, what is results-orientated thinking? Well, results-orientated thinking is using singular events or small events or a very small number of events to basically dictate your future actions and your future plans. This is similar to using like a single spell casting and how it worked out to say, hey, that spell's always great to cast in this situation, or winning a single matchup and assuming your matchup's great, or even just winning, a couple of matches against a deck and instantly assuming your deck's great. But it could also be the opposite of, say, if you cast a spell and it loses you the game, you might think that it's always bad to cast that spell in that situation, or if you play a matchup and lose, you might think that your matchup's horrible. Or if you go to a tournament and go 0-3, you might think your deck is a pile of trash and unplayable. And that's not true in most cases. Obviously, it's true that you can build a bad deck and it's just bad, and no amount of playing it more and more will develop you any further. And, it can still be a bad deck. And I'm not saying that we don't use results at all to dictate future actions. I mean, lots of people play Bank Company in Standard at the moment because it's the best deck. And the results prove themselves. The amount of wins it's had, the amount of top 8s it's had, the amount of events it's dominated prove that it's the best deck in Standard right now. But that's not single matches. That's not single tournaments. That's a whole load of tournaments, a whole load of matches correlating together to prove that. Right, and let's take a very small example then, shall we, for that, what I mean by results-oriented thinking, now that I've kind of discussed it, to kind of get this concept proven to you. So let's say you're playing black-white control, current black-white control, and you're on the play against some other deck, and you keep an opening hand that has land, maybe a planeswalker, like, Sorin, and you also have a single copy of Grasp of Darkness and a single copy of Ultimate Price. And let's say you go like turn 1 Shambling Vents, they go turn 1 Forest, you go and no other play, and then you go turn 2, you play a Swamp or something, maybe a Caves of Koilos, and your opponent goes their turn, land, what was it called again? I had the name on the tip of my tongue. The 2-mana Vigilance creature, the 2-mana 2/3 Vigilance creature that I've had on my tip of my tongue all day. Because I've been saying it over and over again. I've been planning this video all day, which is kind of embarrassing. But let's say they play that card. And let's say, Sylvan Advocate, that's it. Let's say they play a Sylvan Advocate, and they go past their turn, and you want to respond by killing it at the end of turn. You don't want to waste your mana. You've got 2-mana kill spells, and you want to see which spell you're casting on it. Now, some logic would go to dictating maybe casting Grasp of Darkness now. Right? Grasp of Darkness can kill it now, but it can't kill Sylvan Advocate later when they get to 6 land. It's only turn 2, but, if they've got 1 Sylvan Advocate, they could have more. They could be playing Bant, you don't know that yet, maybe. You've only seen 2 lands. and they've both been a forest. It's really hard to dictate what land base they're on, what deck they're on. So it is probably correct to go, I'm going to kill this thing with Grasp of Darkness. But let's say actually the second land they played was something like a Shivan Reef. Right, or then in that situation, let's say the second land they played was a Shivan Reef and you go Grasp of Darkness and go on to win that match because they don't really play of anything of any consequence. You might go, hey, Grasp of Darkness is amazing in this situation. I'm always going to cast it turn 2 because it won me the game, right? Or it was proved to be right, even if it didn't individually win you the game, that proved to be a right situation. But let's say then game 2, they go land, like Shivan Reef, pass turn, you go tap land, pass turn, and then they go forest, Sylvan Advocate again. And again, your hand has both Grasp of Darkness and Ultimate Price. And so you go, well, I'm going to Grasp of Darkness because that was the right play last time, right? And then they go on to play a turn 4 Fortnight's Seal and your Ultimate Price is sitting dead in hand. And no matter what other removal spell you have, unless it's instant speed, they're going to strip that from your hand. And if you've played a tap land turn 3, so you can't even Anguish the Making or something like that, most likely that Fortnight's Seal is going to stay around. And the reality of this situation is just because and the whole point of this example is just because Grasp of Darkness worked out game 1 doesn't mean it was the right choice, right? Like if you looked at their mana base and you saw they had colourless mana, and they had green, blue, red, they're probably Temur, right? And while Temurge is probably the best deck to play at the moment, that's still very, in terms of Temur colours, that's still heavily colourless. And so, they have those Wretched Gryphs. And while I know neither Grasp of Darkness or Ultimate Price kill their big tentacled creature, the Deep Fiend Sea or Elder Deep Fiend. Just because neither one of those killed that, reality is they could be playing things like Thought-Knot Seer as part of their sideboard plan, or maybe someone's playing it mainboard plan as a disruption based on meta and stuff like that. And reality is, once you need to be thinking more of than, hey, maybe this spell will be less useful late game, maybe. Because ultimately, you need to get to the late game for that to matter. And when you get to the late game, well, I mean, you're black-white control. You have cards like Liliana probably in your deck, or you have other removal spells that you can draw late game to make it more usable, in that sense, to kill things, than Grasp of Darkness. And you have to really remember that, let's say they were playing Bank Company, even in the first scenario, Grasp of Darkness is still probably the worst play in game 1 in that situation, simply due to the fact they've got multicoloured creatures, Ultimate Price is a great removal spell, and it's great against Sylvan Advocate, which is probably why you should use it early. People have Ultimate Price in their decks mostly for Sylvan Advocates, and that's probably why you should do it. Let's take a more stepped out example then. Let's go back to old format, Return to Ravnica standard, Return to Ravnica Theros standard, which is the one I played. Your Azorius Control playing against Boros aggro, or Boros Burn, or whatever you want to call it, and they've got a reasonable board state, but black and a red and white open, and you go, Supreme Verdict, and they just go Boros Charm, my things are indestructible. Now, you might be convinced in that situation then, if they've got red-white open, it's always bad to cast a Supreme Verdict. But the reality is, it's often the right play to do. Because A, they need to have Boros Charm for that to matter, and B, you're probably not in many situations where you can afford not to cast it. If they've got a developed board and you're aggro, unless it's like turn 7, in which case you might get away, or 6 or 7, where you might get away with playing a Elspeth in that format, which create 3 soldiers that block really well, you probably do need to board wipe. Yeah, if they've got Boros Charm, you lose. But if you don't cast Supreme Verdict, they're just going to Boros Charm your face and then swing for damage. Like, that's not a better situation. I mean, you're just going to take damage either way, and the creatures are going to stay alive either way, right? So you really need to consider that just because an event turns out badly doesn't mean that it's a bad play. In the same way, just because a play turns out good doesn't make it a good play. And that's the whole point I'm getting here, is to really step beyond results-oriented thinking and get towards right plays and bad plays. And a lot of that does come from just experience, but there are other things you can do to really get beyond this. And the first thing I would actually advise is learning the metagame. Look at the top decks in the format, because most shops do, as far as I've experienced, net deck. And while you've got a few people here and there that brew their own decks, people generally have ideas that are channeled by wizards and how you want to build the deck, right? Like, you might go to a metagame thing and have someone playing zombies. They may not be playing the Pro Tour Zombies deck, but they'll still be playing zombies. Or they might be playing vampires, you know, these kind of tribes. And you kind of need to learn how to beat those decks. Now, vampires actually didn't need to learn to beat, because vampires kind of was awful. But zombies, you know, just because a guy's not playing the pro version of the zombie deck, learning how to fight zombies helps you fight zombies, you know. And the way you learn to fight a deck is by learning what it's got. Learning its kind of tips and tricks. So, you know, look at the deck lists online, maybe watch a few video streams. And actually, Star City Games is amazing for this, right? Shout out to Star City Games. Well, I mean, they don't do standard as often as they used to. They used to do it every week. But their standard opens, especially like early after a new format, is really good for looking at how decks interact and how decks perform. Right? Yes, you can go away and do your own testing, but sometimes you can forget some interactions or miss interactions. And a lot of Star City players, or at least some of the players in the Star City game circuit, while they're not necessarily pro players at the same standard as Louis Scott Vargas or in Turton World, are still very good players, you know, better than the average shop player probably. And they make some crazy, amazing decks that get featured on camera, and watching those kind of gives you an edge. Also reading articles. Again, Star City Games, Channel Fireball, whole load of things are out there for you to look at them. Or other YouTube channels, you know, things like the Mana Source. Wedge does some amazing deck techs that are very simple, but very detailed in what you need to learn about the basics of a deck. You know, go away and look at those deck techs, because if he's telling you how to play the deck, you can kind of learn how to not play the deck or kill the deck in that way. You know, unravel the ether of the deck, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, that's basically my video that I wanted to do on results orientated thinking, or snapshotting, or whatever you want to call it. I know it's not a heavily detailed video. It's not going to be the best video you probably ever see on this topic, or the best thing on this topic, but I don't think there's that many out there, and it's not a topic I've seen discussed recently. And I do think it's an incredibly important topic for me to consider more than necessarily other people as well, because I need to learn how to really truly results orientated thinking. And there's actually other videos I want to do, like reading the board state and not thinking too far ahead as well. So that might be a video I'll do in the immediate near future if people would be interested in that, if people enjoy this video. I know I lost an FNM last night, or had to drop because I threw round 3 because I was thinking 5, 10, 15 minutes ahead instead of looking at the board state and actually seeing what he did play. You know, I was thinking what play I would make, and then he didn't make that play, but I played as if he had and threw away the game out of nowhere when he was on 1 life. So, yeah, I mean, there are things to consider. But yeah, no, results-oriented thinking is definitely something I think a lot of players need to get out of, and I think is an incredibly easy way to improve your game. Learning that there are right plays and wrong plays, and that sometimes the right play loses you the game and sometimes the wrong play wins you the game, is great. Obviously, what separates a best pro player and the average player is knowing when the right play is the wrong play in some ways. Think a bit of a great closing analogy is actually House, right? House MD, a show with Hugh Laurie, a great British actor playing an American doctor who basically never plays by the ethics rules. Ever. And there's at least one episode where either he does something or Foreman does something after being taught by House how to do this, where the doctor's like telling them, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have done the thing you did. And when he goes, well, what I did made her live, and following the protocols, following the moral procedures, following guidelines would have killed her. And the guy turns around and says, look, 99% of the time, what doing the protocols keeps them alive, and doing what you did kills them. And so the person says, well, what about the 1%? And it's like, well, the problem is every doctor thinks they're the 1%. If everyone thinks they're the 1%. And that's why right plays and wrong plays are the most simple thing you need to learn. Yes, there are times where you shouldn't make the conventional right play because that's the only way to win the game. But the problem is that 9 times out of 10, you're not in that situation. You think you are when you're not. You probably, I don't have the skill often to make that judgment properly. So I often lose games that I should win because I've made that wrong play. And the reality is that's the reason people like Owen Turtenwald, Louis Scott Vargas, Brian Bronwyn, any pro I want to mention, Patrick Chapin, Samuel Black, Shaheen Soorani, the list goes on. The reason why those people are pros is because they are the 1%, in general. They do know when to make that wrong play right. And yes, we will eventually need to learn that to become the best players in the game, but they had to start by learning the 9 times out of 10 rule, by making the right play and learning that sometimes the right play still loses you the game. And so I think you really do, I think everyone, new players and experienced players, need to sometimes consider this. Is what I'm making is the right play? Is it the wrong play? And is my play based on past experience in like the last game I played? Or is it based on long-term like knowledge? Is it made by me actually reading the board state? There are a lot of subtle clues you can get from just their lands they're playing and knowing the metagame more that help you make the right play. And so understanding the possible matchup more than, oh, well, I don't know, I may have more of these. Well, no, he's also got other things in his deck that you need to consider. And so you really should always consider, you should also consider your own deck, right? Just because you don't have a Liliana in your hand now, if you're running 3 of them, once that thing's dead, you've got the same chance of drawing Liliana as he does now a second copy of Sylvan Advocate or any creature he's got. Just because your Grasp of Darkness doesn't quite reach the toughness of it at that point doesn't mean it won't ever be good enough. And you also have to consider they have to hit things like 6 land for that. And so maybe you have to consider that, yes, okay, maybe expecting them to not hit 6 lands is a bad play, maybe. But knowing that that is a possibility combined with the fact you could get Liliana makes Saving Grasp a better play than people think it is. And so, that's one of the great reasons why Liliana is such an amazing card in the deck, is it allows you to make the right play of ultimate pricing the Sylvan Advocate a lot easier. Because often the decks that run Sylvan Advocate run a lot of multicolored creatures, or some colorless creatures, or just creatures that only Grasp of Darkness can hit, where ultimate price can't for whatever reason. Manlands is a huge example. The amount of times I've seen people grasp, or I've grasped a creature I could have priced, not paying attention to the manlands on the field and losing to those manlands. Just because I didn't save the grasp for a single shambling vent that gains him the last 2 points of life, that allows him to block and survive, and then kill me with his Sorin on the backswing. If I'd had the Grasp of Darkness in my hand instead of the ultimate price, I would have won that game occasionally. And so, yeah, ultimately, that's what this video has been about, is just learning that the right play needs to be the right play and the wrong play is the wrong play, and that 99% of the time you should always make the right play. And maybe when you get to a certain level, that's when you start realizing when the wrong play is the right play, but most of us aren't there. So all of us, myself included, need to start by making the right play, and then we can move on from there. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I really do hope you've enjoyed this video. I haven't done a video like this in a very long time, so if you did like this video, please like it down below. Give me comments on what kind of things you want me to see me do, maybe. If you'd like to see that other video I mentioned earlier on, I'll try and get all my videos out as I can. So yeah, but if you have any suggestions, any questions you want me to answer, that kind of thing, I'm always going to be here to help. Whether or not you appreciate my opinion, that's another matter. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.